Thank you for joining DirectWomen for today's honoree panel discussion. We will get started momentarily. Thank you for joining DirectWomen for today's honoree panel discussion. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Thank you for joining DirectWomen for today's honoree panel discussion. We'll give everyone just a minute or two more to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, thank you for joining DirectWomen for today's honoree panel discussion. My name is Kelsey Velma, and I will be the technical moderator behind the scenes. I'm the Director of Programs and Operations here at DirectWomen, and I'm excited to be hosting this session. Before we get started, I'd like to run through a few housekeeping notes. You should all be able to see the screen right now and hear my voice. Attendees, however, are muted, so although all of you can hear me, we cannot hear you. That said, you can still ask questions, and we encourage you to do so. Please submit your questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom console. Do not use the raise hand or chat features. Feel free to submit your questions at any time during today's program. Today's webinar will be approximately 1 hour with 45 minutes of content, followed by a few minutes for Q&A at the end. Our speakers' biographies will be provided in the chat once the program has begun. Lastly, there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar that we hope you will complete. It's only 4 questions and should take no more than 2 to 3 minutes tops. With that, I'll turn it over to the moderator of today's program, Brandy Stellings. Brandy?
Great, thank you, Kelsey. And thank you to our panelists, and also welcome to all the attendees. We're delighted you could join us. I'm Brandy Stellings, as Kelsey said, and I'm the moderator for today's session. I am a partner at Best Relate, a firm that works with organizations to assess and address workplace misconduct. And prior to that, I worked in the public and private sectors at Catalyst to advance women in the workplace, Cravath, and NBC. I am also a former DirectWomen board member, a role which I served for many years and really enjoyed because the mission is so important. For more than 15 years, DirectWomen has helped advance the mission of increasing the representation of women lawyers on corporate boards. We've done that through identifying exceptional women lawyers, helping train them and give them the resources to really best position themselves for board service. And we have also acted as a resource for organizations who are looking to add women lawyers to their boards. So for those of you who were with us in October at the Sandra Day O'Connor Awards Luncheon, you know how amazing each of these panelists is. And I'm really thrilled that we have a chance for a more in-depth discussion today. I'm going to give very brief introductions. As Kelsey said, you'll have access to bios and in the chat. It really would take the entire webinar time to go through all of their many accomplishments, but I'll do a very high level introduction and I'll do it alphabetically. So the first panelist I'm going to introduce is Honoree Sale. She's the recipient of the 2022 Marianne Jorgensen Board Empowerment Award. As you can see, she has many titles after her name, but let me sum it up and say that Honoree is really a corporate governance and leadership expert. She is a professor and teaches at Georgetown, both the law and business schools, and also part of the executive education faculty at Harvard Law School. She just finished 2 terms on the Board of Governors for FINRA. She's currently a director at CBOE, U.S. Securities Exchanges and related entities, and also is the longtime board chair of the DirectWomen Board Institute, and also a long-serving former member of the DirectWomen Board. Next is Mary Shapiro, recipient of the 2022 Sandra Day O'Connor Board Excellence Award. As you can see, she's the Vice Chair for Public Policy and Special Advisor to the Chairman of Bloomberg, and she's also currently is a Director of CVS and Morgan Stanley. What this doesn't say, among many notable accomplishments that Mary has, she was the first woman to serve as the SEC Chair, and is the only person to have served as a chair of the SEC, FINRA, and the CFTC. And then I will go to Kathleen Wilson-Thompson. Welcome, Kathleen. She's the recipient of the 2022 Distinguished Alumna Award. Currently serves on the boards of Tesla, McKesson, and Wolverine Worldwide. Some of you might be wearing some of their shoes as you're watching our webinar today. And she formerly served as the Global Chief Human Resources Officer at Walgreens Boots Alliance. And she also served in operational and executive roles at Kellogg. And we're going to hear a little more about that during the webinar, a little preview there. But also, last but not least, Kathleen is a distinguished alumna, as you can gather from the award's name, of our Board Institute class of 2007, which was our inaugural class. So we're just thrilled to see all the great success that Kathleen has had. So again, welcome to Kathleen, Mary, and Hillary. And without further ado, we'll start the discussion. As Kelsey mentioned, there's a Q&A where you can drop some questions. We're going to have a moderated discussion first, and then we'll go to some questions later. So I thought we would kick it off with the first question, which I find that there's an insatiable appetite for knowledge about, which is, how did you get your first board seat? Because that first board seat is often so crucial to the rest of your board career. So I'm going to start just with the order that appears on my screen. And Kathleen, if you could kick us off first, and then we'll go to Mary and then Hillary. We love these origin stories.
Sure. Thank you, Brandy. Great question. Hello, everyone. I can share with you that my first board experience was in short order due to participating in the DirectWomen Institute. It certainly helped prepare me for my board service. But in addition to that, I know you've all heard of sponsors and people who just take you under their wing. I was fortunate enough to have a director on Kellogg's board who agreed to sponsor me. She is a phenomenal woman. She invested her time and interest in grooming me, taking my calls, and helping me professionally in my development, and ensured that certainly while I was an executive, I continued to gather the appropriate skills that would enhance my ability. That said, she was on the Vulcan board at the time and was on Nom and Gov, and I think she chaired it. So she submitted my name. I had to go through the entire vetting process that we'll probably come to talk about later, but I certainly would not have been on that slate had it not been for my mentor. And I obviously did get the seat. It was my first board, and I served for about 10 years.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. And you raised an important issue that we'll come back to later, which is sponsors and the power of mentors and sponsors, and also want to hear about how she saw you in action on the board, but we'll get to that. Mary.
So, well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here and to see everyone again. So I'm going to actually talk about my first two board experiences because they were so different in how I arrived there. The first is really due to a little bit of serendipity, and don't ever underestimate the power of serendipity in your life. I was actually running NESD regulation, the predecessor to FINRA, in 1997, and I was attending a corporate governance conference right here in Washington, and there was a small dinner afterwards, and I was seated next to the corporate secretary, Philip Morris. And I did not know at the time, but Philip Morris was looking to spin off Kraft Foods into a separate company, and they needed to build an entire board from scratch. And while I probably wouldn't have been interested in joining the Philip Morris board, I was definitely interested in joining the Kraft board. And as a result of that dinner, was invited to come and meet the CEO and chairman. And it progressed from there. I joined the Kraft Foods board. I chaired the nominating and governance committee, and I spent about 10 years there and really thoroughly enjoyed it. The second board, though, was quite a bit different. It came about as a result of my service on a not-for-profit board. I was on the board of my alma mater, Franklin and Marshall College. I got to know another board member. Some of you may also know Ken Duberstein, former chief of staff to President Reagan, who served on many corporate boards. We developed a friendship through our F&M connection and board service, and he recommended me to the CEO of Synergy, which is now Duke Energy, but was at the time Synergy Corporation, an Ohio, Kentucky based utility. And because I had a background in derivatives and energy trading was a very hot topic in those days, I was invited to join that board. So the not-for-profit route actually, I think, is a really tried and true one for many people. It's a way to meet people who have access to corporate boards and to get to know them, and also to learn about governance. So for me, that worked out really well.
Great. Thank you, Mary. There's a lot of themes there that we're going to want to unpack further. One thing that really comes to mind hearing both of those stories is that as someone used to say, life is one big audition. So you never know if it's who you're sitting next to at a dinner or, you know, with the not-for-profit service. Undoubtedly, they saw you in action on that board. So both of those routes are really interesting, and we'll want to dive into some of those issues a little more too. Thank you. And then Hillary.
Thank you. And thank you for that kind introduction, Brandy. I'm so happy to be here. And I just want to echo something that both Kathleen and Mary have said. In the DirectWomen Board Institute, we say all the time, it's all about the network, stupid, right? Mm-hmm. And our point there is, you saw the networking stories in action here. These roles, and mine included, are not roles one applies for. They are roles where someone in your network puts your name in the hat, or you start asking people, right, for opportunities, and they help you. And my first board was actually FINRA, and they knew of me because I have a background in financial services and securities, but in fact, an alum of DirectWomen. Elise Walter, who's beloved to many of us, was on the board at the time. And when she put my name in, and when it surfaced, she spoke on my behalf. And she was not alone. There was another CEO on that board who knew me from some of my board and governance work, who said, we should get her, she'd be great, right? That's how this happens. There's a lot of vetting, which we'll come to, right? That happens. But in the first instance, it was people who knew me. And I just want to tag on because I just joined the board's exchange boards at SIBO. And that came through somebody from the FINRA board who knew somebody there and made an introduction.
Great, thank you. And I love this consistency of themes, which is also, I think, about performance and being prepared too for when these opportunities arise. And one thing I want to related, but turn a little bit to, you know, obviously given DirectWomen's mission, one thing we talk a lot about in the Institute is how do lawyers best position themselves? That sometimes that can be even a bigger barrier to joining a board. You know, certainly boards aren't thinking, you know, we have general counsel, we have outside law firm, why do we need a lawyer? So I think it'd be really interesting to hear about your advice about how lawyers can best position themselves for board service. And I love Kathleen's trajectory through a variety of different roles. I think that really helped position you, Kathleen, to be such a valuable asset to so many boards. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that journey, and then we'll turn to Hillary, because Hillary is a coach par excellence about helping women lawyers position themselves for board service. But Kathleen, if you could share some of your experience. And you're on mute.
Thank you, Brandy. In terms of my career trek from the legal department at Kellogg to ultimately being in the C-suite, I started out as a junior lawyer and moved my way up. But speaking to both of my mentors, one of whom I mentioned earlier, and I'll share with you, it's Ann Korlovis. She was a former Secretary of Labor under President Reagan, who happened to be on our board, and then Artie Bird, who was my male mentor and happened to be the head of operations. I shared with him that I wanted to be on the succession plan for his job. I had high hopes. I wanted to be head of ops, and I also knew I wanted to be on a corporate board. And as early as law school, I had my sights set on board work. I actually went back and got an LLM in corporate and finance law to better prepare myself to make the trek. But in speaking to both of them and other board members with whom I was friends, they all shared you need business experience to complement the legal experience. And oftentimes we get that while we're in legal because we're business lawyers, many of us. I happen to be labor and employment and went on to become the chief labor and employment officer, but it was through getting different experiences that I made my way to that seat. In fact, I went to talk to Ernie Bird and told him I wanted to be his assistant because at the time they were pairing junior executives with seniors. And quite frankly, there had no women in that role. And so I wanted to, break that ceiling. And he said, sure, come back tomorrow. And I literally was just thrilled. I was going to go back and see my mentor, head of operations, EVP, walking in thinking I was going to be his assistant, fly around the world in the corporate jet and do just wonderful things doing PowerPoints. He said, not so fast. So you have to be careful what you ask for. He shared with me I needed to learn ops and that I would have to go to the Memphis plant and work for 2 years on the plant floor, that if you wanted to learn ops, you needed to know how the product was manufactured. And I love manufacturing. So I happily went to that role. And I will tell you, I was able to chair the labor negotiations. I was a member of the management team for operations. And it was just a wonderful role. Now it was HR, it was head of HR, but as such, the way we were organized, you were a member of the management team. So I got great management experience and leadership experience, and that certainly complemented the legal experience. And then when I returned after 2 years, I was promoted.
Great. And I loved too, Kathleen, I think we talked about it before, talked about, sometimes the move is like sideways or even like, down, because you had a longer term vision and path in mind. So I think it's a really important message.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I took 2 steps down. I was administered in terms of pay, but importantly, I needed to get that developmental experience. And so I'm really pleased I did.
Great, thank you. And then Hillary, what are some of your top tips? I know that you literally almost written the book or articles about this, but what are your top tips too on this topic?
I think Kathleen's story is perfect. And, we know our audience, DirectWomen's audience in particular, is women lawyers. And I think Mary's going to talk about framing your skill sets in a few minutes. But what I would say is, first of all, in the Institute, we teach everybody how to pitch themselves for a board seat. And we spend a lot of time talking about the fact that telling people that you're a lawyer is not your first pitch. So it's reformulating your own mindset about how you're a business person. It's about learning to ask. You don't ask, you don't get. As I said before, these are not jobs one applies for. So you've got to activate your network. And when you activate your network, and I can tell you, because I've been doing this in recent months since my term on the FINRA board ended, the first thing everyone's going to ask you is, what kind of board do you want and why? Right? The why piece is about your add value, and just saying, oh, I add value is not going to win the day. You need to have thought about it and framed it and pitched yourself. You need a bio, a board specific bio. You need to scrape all that law stuff off. And, we also talk a lot about nonprofits, right? Mary talked about her particular nonprofit experience. It's the perfect nonprofit experience to sort of frame people's thinking. As I always say, you should do a nonprofit because you love it and believe in it. And then there are some that can accelerate your board search, and your college alma mater is a good example. If you want your nonprofit to be valuable for your board search, you want to be on a nonprofit with people who can help you for that, so that when they see you in the nonprofit space, they say, oh yeah, I'd like this person on my board, or I'd like to tell someone else about that. And not all boards can do that for you. And that's okay, because we should do what we're passionate about as well.
Great. That's just the tip of the iceberg, I know, but lots of great nuggets in there for people to think about. And you reminded me too, you talked about you don't ask, you don't get. Another important kernel that I heard in Kathleen's story was articulating the ambition to her boss that she wanted his job. And so really laying out, this is my vision, this is where I want to go, what are the steps I need to do to get there. So I think that's important too. And Hillary, you teed it up nicely. Mary, we want to turn to you a little too to kind of round out this topic of how can you best frame legal skills as an asset for board service. Certainly you had so many great experiences and expertise that made many boards turn to you, but tell us more about advice you have around this framing of legal skills.
Sure. So I would agree with Hillary that the first line of your pitch ought not be that you're a lawyer, but I do think it's a tremendous credential. It tells the world that you've done something very difficult. You've applied yourself for 3 years after college to work through really hard, thorny issues, and you've graduated and been successful at doing that. And so I do think it's a great credential, particularly in a time when we have heightened disclosure about what are the credentials of board members, what makes you well suited to be on this board, and having a legal background is important. Having a regulatory background is, I think, becoming one of the most important skill sets for corporate directors, really regardless of what sector or industry the company is in, because every industry is highly regulated these days. And even those that aren't highly regulated are subject to disclosure around regulatory issues like climate change, like cybersecurity, and so forth. So I think it's a really valuable credential, and I wouldn't minimize it. I might not make it the first thing I say, but I wouldn't minimize it because I think it's enormously valuable. I do think the skills that we learned as lawyers and as women actually are really valuable assets to a corporate board. Critical thinking, having skepticism, probing on issues. Those are critical to corporate decision-making, analytical thinking, and the ability to see both sides of an argument. That we all know how to do that. And that's really important. It's particularly important when you have to bring compromise to a situation. And I think that's something we as women are actually particularly good at. But having the ability to dissect an argument and understand its weaknesses and its strengths, really important. Conflict resolution. I think, again, we as women are particularly good at that as a general matter. And I don't mean to suggest men aren't, but I think we try to find the right way forward that bruises the fewest number of people. And but that ability to resolve conflict is a skill we have honed in law school, likely. Again, understanding regulation, important in every sector and industry, understanding what the expectations of regulators are, which we've all seen as lawyers, really important to bring that understanding into the corporate boardroom. And then I think valuing compliance, having that sort of sense of ethics and integrity and compliance that's drilled into us in law school. Also just a tremendous asset for a corporate board. So I think sort of on every level, we have a lot to offer to corporate boards.
Brandy, can I chime in? Would you mind?
Please do.
I just want to build on what Mary said. I mean, obviously DirectWomen believes that. It's what we do over and over and over again. And I think Mary's exactly right. And I think that pitch for each of us is something different. So in my case, the regulatory piece is part of my pitch. Obviously, in Kathleen's, I have to assume, right, especially in today's world with all the focus on human capital, that her HR background is invaluable. For those of you watching this webinar that have deep experience in M&A, you are a fabulous fit for an acquisitive company. I hate to say it, but if you're a bankruptcy lawyer, if we're headed for some restructuring, there are going to be boards that want you in that space, right? Those of you who are experts in ESG have your own market right now. It's all about, as Mary said, honing into those skills that we have built as lawyers and then framing them as skills that a board wants without emphasizing the fact that you're the lawyer, right, for the board, because you're not. They all have their own lawyers.
That's so true. And if I can jump back in for 1 second, I started out my career as a derivatives lawyer. It never occurred to me that that would be of enormous interest to a corporate board, but it was. Synergy really wanted somebody who understood the energy markets, and I didn't specialize in derivatives because of anything like that, but it turned out to be just a huge benefit.
That's right. It reminds, oh, Kathleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be remiss if I don't chime in as well. I will say that, just building on both Mary and Hillary's comments, the thread between this is all of our experiences. We are all lawyers, but it is the experiences that we gained while we honed our skills that particularly boards and governance committees want to hear about. Certainly that's some of the questions I got for each of the boards I've sat on or either currently sitting on. They want to understand how I applied those skill sets. And I was able to share with them the various experiences that I was able to have because I was a lawyer, because I went to Memphis, because I chaired the contract. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd be sitting at Tesla talking about something that happened in Memphis, Tennessee, but I did. And it was something that got me over the line in terms of knowing manufacturing, working in a plant, working all 3 shifts, understanding how to work with folks on the line. And just to your point, Hillary, the whole human capital experience as a lawyer.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And I think the common thread I'm hearing also is really how you cast all of that expertise in a way that's really relevant to the problems and issues and challenges the boards are facing. Exactly right. And another thing that I think that caught my ear when you're talking, Mary, is you're talking about some of the soft skills too, whether it's skepticism, conflict resolution. I think all of that's really important as well too, because board dynamics is really a crucial thing. And Mary, I think you talked in your remarks at the luncheon about you don't want a board that's an echo chamber. And Hillary, you talk about the creative friction. So really bringing together all of those like hard skills as well as the soft skills that you have as experienced lawyers, chief people officers, regulators, experts, all of that. And I think a key thing that DirectWomen, and of course I'm biased, helps with is really helping you package that and figure out how to lead with that without leaning into your old comfort zone of being a lawyer and reciting those. So on that note, I would love to hear, Kathleen, you alluded to it a little bit at the top of the hour, but if you could talk a little more about how participating in the Institute helped. You'd gotten all these great critical work experiences, you have powerful sponsors, but tell us more about how the Board Institute helped you on your path.
Sure. And Hillary, I like how you talked about don't lead with being a lawyer. I think when I landed at your doorstep, I think I told you first thing, I'm a lawyer and I have an LLM and I'm fabulous. And you're like, that's great. What are you going to do with it? So that said, the Institute was highly effective in teaching me the fundamentals of board service. First off, we went through some self-critical analysis, which I still use today. When I look at my own resume or my experiences and I determine what the gaps are, I know now how to fill those gaps and how to get the requisite experience that I need. The faculty that the Institute assembled was wonderful. We were able to listen to very panels of wildly successful women and men, for that matter, who had matriculated through different experiences in their careers, but they were able to then we were able to listen to them and ask questions about their career journey and get real-time information. We also made professional contacts that I still hold dear today, and that was very important. And then relative to the pitch, it's interesting when you have to sit in front of a group and actually pitch yourself, but get that analysis in the moment. It helps you in what I call that self-critical piece. And then last, it helped me build my confidence. And I spoke to that when I actually accepted my alumni award. And I can't tell you enough how important that was to know that the group would bring you into the fold and help you hone the skills, but also help you believe in yourself. I'll talk a little bit later about a can-do attitude, but it helped going through the Institute in that regard.
Great. Yeah, I love that. That really caught my ear when you talked about that, Kathleen, at the luncheon, about the confidence and also about the community as well. I think the community is really powerful and important. And I noticed a question in the chat, or I just want to bring it up, which is Hillary might be one that you want to tackle, because I know it's not a cut and dry answer. And that question is, at what stage or year of practice does one become eligible or qualified for a board position? There's a lot to unpack in that. And I hope people can hear that in terms of Kathleen's journey, Mary's and Hillary's, but Hillary, I don't know if you want to tackle that first.
Sure, I'm happy to chime in, and I'm sure others will have ideas. So I'll say a couple of things. If you're a lawyer in a firm, the time that you can do this is when your firm will allow you, right? And some firms don't allow board service because of Sarbanes-Oxley, frankly. But many firms do make exceptions. They're one-offs, and there's an actual process, right? If you're in-house and a GC, for example, then the question is different. The question is whether your CEO thinks it's okay for you to be on a board, because boards are not zero time commitments. They can be pretty extensive commitments. If you're on a board that meets overseas, that just increases your time commitment. So all of those things matter. I think the question is also, though, about seniority or skill set. And I think when DirectWomen first started, I think statistically it was true that people were going on boards at 60 or even older. That is still true today. There are many boards with age limits, and there's a desire for a runway, meaning when they put you on a board, they want you to be able to serve for enough years, because it takes time to understand what you're doing and get your sea legs in the boardroom and be actually able to be a valuable contributor. So starting your search over 65 is not easy. It's not impossible if you have the right network, but that is a different point to be launching your search than younger than that, so to speak. And it used to be that we really didn't see very many people, for example, in their 40s on boards. And I think when we first started noticing that younger cohort on boards was when, for example, Starbucks, who has a huge young market, decided to put a younger person on their board for lots of good reason, right? So there's no actual age or point in the career. The real question is, at what point do you, each of you individually, have a value proposition for this board search? And at what point do you have the network to kick into action and make it happen?
Great, thank you. I think that's a great answer. And I just add, I think it's, again, really about the experiences. And Kathleen, again, I was really struck when you said that you knew from relatively early in your career that you aspired to a board seat. So I think it's really important, once you identify that that is something that is on your career journey path, to think about what are the experiences that you need. And so Kathleen was very intentional about getting that operational experience, the huge assets of being in human resources people. So it's a great segue. So I think that is the mistake that I often see a lot of lawyers, is not thinking about it till they're much further along in their path and haven't gotten some of the critical experiences. I'm just looking to see if anyone else was trying to jump in. Okay. And with that, I think, Hillary, you just teed up the issue of networking. Mary, you talked about, the serendipity of sitting next to someone at dinner, and then also your nonprofit board. So can we talk a little more in depth about how you activate your network, good ways to use it, any pitfalls? And also, I think one of you on our prep call said, I'm not a networker. I'm not sure if I believe that, but networking can sometimes be a dirty word or makes people nervous. So let's tackle networking. And I see Hillary nodding her head, so I don't know if she wants to jump start it, and then Mary and Kathleen, feel free to chime in.
Sure, I'm happy to. I actually teach a lot of women and women's leadership, both at the law school and the business school here, but also in companies and firms. I work with people on these issues. And to Brandy's point, networking, dirty word. A lot of women see networking as very political. Networking is just about relationships. And networking is in its most powerful form, a quid pro quo, but not in every moment. In other words, you don't have to pay back for every ask and vice versa, but it is about having relationships that you can turn to. And I am confident that everybody who's listening to this has those. They just may not have thought about them in this way. And in DirectWomen, in the Institute, we take some of the exercises that I've, for example, created for clients, and we use them in the Institute. We have a networking spreadsheet that we work on, and we have one-on-one coaching around that, learning to think beyond the immediate person. Do the 6 degrees of separation. Are there people they can introduce you to, right? But all of that requires sort of being able to ask and getting a little more comfortable with asking. And it also requires us to do the same for our friends and peers. And then asking feels easy and comfortable, right? That once you're doing it for others and they're doing it for you, it becomes easier. But I can honestly say until I finished my FINRA search, finished my FINRA term, I wasn't really focused on other boards because in some ways my best sell was some kind of securities or other financial services related situation. And I hadn't thought deeply enough about my network, despite everything I'm saying here. Mm-hmm. And I have been really working on thinking about that differently and feeling comfortable asking more people to help me make connections to have these conversations.
I think it makes us all feel better to know that you feel that you're not. It's always easy to give the advice, sometimes hard to follow it. And I think you've helped make everyone realize that everyone feels a little bit of trepidation about networking more. And just looking to see if Mary or Kathleen wanted to chime in.
I was just going to add one sentence, which is I completely agree. It's very hard to ask for help. But people actually want to help and they want to be asked, and they get a psychic payoff from that, from being able to help, being able to put talented women on other boards. So don't hesitate to go to people and ask them for advice and counsel and help.
Can I just say to Mary's credit there, Mary and I recently, we've never run into each other at a social event before, but we recently ran into each other at a social event in DC. And Mary said to me, send me your bio. I'd love to help. So I just want to say, you go, Mary.
And Mary and Hillary, if I could also add to that, to your point, Mary, about the psychic piece you get in helping, we also sometimes have this fiduciary duty as members of the governance committee. I am always on the hunt for great talent. When we come to the board table, we are surfacing names. We're also working with firms, but particularly our own personal network or those of the friends and colleagues that we have often enhance a slate. So it's really great when you have someone reach out to you. There are some pitfalls, Brandy, and I don't know if you want to shift to that, but I can certainly share.
Yes, please do, because people need to hear.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it in our prep about turn-ons and turn-offs. I've been approached by people, and to the points already made, certainly happy to help relative to my time and capacity, and that's the caveat. When people approach others for sponsorship or for networking, you have to be cognizant of their time and just be respectful of it. So that said, I love it when people come forward and they have their thought in mind about what they're looking for or looking at or what they need. And then I can certainly help. If I can't help, I know someone perhaps who can. So coming prepared with the resume, with your desires, and being able to articulate your experience, much like Hillary has mentioned that they've taught us in the Institute to pitch. But that said, a turnoff is, antithetical to that. When people approach you and they have no clue other than, can you help me? And you're sitting there, how can I help? What do you need? And they're not articulating what they actually want, or their sites, or the industry, the mission vision of a company, the value set, the things that are going to, encourage them to want to be a member of a particular board. And a little vignette I'll share with you is that I was approached by someone in a sponsorship perspective, for perspective and networking. And the first question the person asked me was, are you on any boards?
Know
Needless
your
to
audience.
say,
They hadn't
know
done
your
any
audience. Thanks,
homework.
Mary. Well said. I'll leave it at that. But the caveat is be prepared.
Yeah, do your homework, be prepared. And also what I'm also hearing too is make it as, easy for the person to understand how they can help you.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. Any other pitfalls, missteps, Mary or Hillary, that you've seen, so I do think there are do's and don'ts about approaching for help.
I think so.
I'll echo the be prepared. By the way, women are generally pretty good at that. We're less likely to fly by the seat of our pants. We're more likely to over prepare. But I think showing up empty-handed is not smart. And then I'll add to that, you can always follow up. So this goes to the asking question. You have the conversation. You never quite got around to saying, but will you help me? Can you get me on a board? That's where the really nice email follow-up goes. Attach the board bio. That goes for everything in life, in my opinion, right? Not all asks are easy in the moment. Many asks are an after the fact ask, right? And many asks are sideways. And by that, I mean, sometimes a friend can ask for you, or a friend can make the introduction to say, I want to be sure you know so-and-so. I think she would be great on your board, but she would also be great on lots of others if you're willing to have a chat with her, right? They've already made the ask for you if the person says yes. So keep that in mind, because this is about a big, fat, virtuous circle.
I love that. I love that element of reciprocity, I think, is what I'm really hearing. And it reminds me, might be a statement people disagree with, maybe a little provocative, but at a women's leadership meeting I was chairing last month, Sylvia Hewlett was talking, and she made a statement that then in her experience, she's seen that women are less comfortable being transactional, or maybe not transactional enough in terms of giving away advice and contacts. And so I wonder if anyone has a reaction to that. I sometimes feel like, that can, I think it's really getting to that asking, making your ask, and the discomfort that sometimes people feel with it. But then I think Mary is also absolutely right. There's actually a lot of research that shows that people do want to help. So any thoughts about this not being transactional enough? Then we'll pivot to the leavening agent, because I definitely want to get to that theme.
I could talk about the favor rule, but I don't want to cut someone else off.
Oh, yeah, let's hear the favor rule. I'm not sure I know it.
I think we talk about it in most of the institutes, but a former colleague of mine taught me the favor rule, which I think is super valuable. So to your point, I think a lot of women do a lot of favors. I think if we could hear the audience right now, and I said to the audience at large, when you do a favor for somebody and they thank you, what do you say? And the normal answer is no problem, by the way, even when it was, or happy to do it. And I would say it's very easy to add to the, I was happy to do that for you. Add the following on, I know you would do the same for me. It's actually polite. It's very gentle. If that phrase doesn't work for you, pick another one. But the minute you do that, you're opening the door to making your own ask. And that's true in all of these contexts. I've had women say it works with, carpool to soccer when somebody ends up being the only one ever driving, but it also works in this board context as well. And to just go back to Sylvia Hewlett, there's pretty good research that men think of this as totally transactional and not a problem. And when they think of it as transactional, they're not thinking about it as there's no relationship here. They're just thinking that's what you do. You ask people for stuff you need, right? And we're less comfortable with that, and we should focus on being more comfortable. And those of you who are listening to this and who are GCs, you need to start thinking about lawyers you can put on your board, because if you ever want to get on one, you need to be adding, and you need to be not afraid to have us in the boardroom with you. we're value add to you and we don't want your job.
That's great. And I hope everyone's writing that down. Kathleen, were you about to say something?
No, I want to underscore that. I particularly don't like any words or phrases or monikers that put us in a box as women. So my view is the thinking we're not transactional is a stereotype we just shouldn't own. Like everybody listening, let's just indicate we don't own that, because to your point, Hillary, there are tons of things we do and engage in our daily lives. Soccer moms, carpools, my child's in college. I sometimes take someone else's kid there. We do a lot that's transactional without calling it as such. And we do it in our daily work lives as well, particularly as lawyers. So I'd say A, don't own it. And then B, let's work on that as a skill set rather than saying we are or are not transactional. I believe we're completely capable. We need to be confident and exercise the skill, build the muscle like you do other muscles and skill sets, and understand that it takes a bit of time. I know we're going to talk about leavening later, but give yourself the time and grace to be what we're calling transactional. Just a small another vignette about Ann Corlogas, who helped me when I was in the boardroom. Young lawyer, always in front of the board, presenting on various issues around labor and employment. Ann would give me a sticky note every board meeting. Now, I shook in my boots because I knew she was doing it, but at the same time, when I'd go prep in the mirror, I'd think Ann's going to critique me. That was a transactional piece though, because she also told me, don't screw up. She said, people know, I'm sponsoring you. So, bring it. And I would always know that transaction was going to happen. But I relished in getting those notes. I promise you, I still have some of them. Some of them complimented me and told me what I did well. But importantly, she would always tell me what I didn't do so well. And even once, and this is for another panel, she took me out in the hall and said, don't do that again. That wasn't even stick-worthy, noteworthy. It was, I'm pulling you up right now. I'm your sponsor. Don't do that. And it was just sparring with a board member, but we're lawyers.
That is a powerful story of sponsorship in action, and also that feedback is a gift, and your incredible receptivity to it. So you should always say thank you when you get feedback, even if it's hard. And clearly you treasure those notes, the good and the bad. It's a great story. I want to get to leavening agents in just a moment, but I just saw some questions come in on the Q&A, and one of them is a topic we haven't touched upon at all. So I just would love everyone to jump in if you have thoughts on this, which is how do recruiting firms fit into the networking and placement? Because we've talked so much about leveraging your networks, but how do recruiting firms figure into your aspirations to get onto a board, or the way that boards use recruiting firms? And I don't know who wants to go first.
I'm happy to jump in on that. I think my experience has been that the board seats I've occupied, and I think there have been 6 over a very long career, have come through, I guess what we would call networking events, through relationships I had with people already on those boards. That said, I think search firms can play a really important role. And when I chaired the nominating and governance committee of Craft, I used a search firm to try to build out our board. And I think they're particularly helpful in a couple of ways. One is that if you're looking for particular skill sets that you're not that familiar with, technology perhaps, or financial acumen, or human resources management, I think a search firm can really help you expand that pool of prospective candidates with those particular skill sets. The other thing I think they're very helpful with is diligencing candidates and having those soft conversations to determine whether somebody's actually interested in your board, whether they might have conflicts, and then managing the logistics of doing the interviews, running the conflicts checks, arranging for the other members of the corporate governance committee or the board to meet the candidates. So all of that's hugely time consuming, not very rewarding work. Placement firms can be very helpful in doing all of that. But I think it's really a combination. And I would guess, although, and maybe Hillary has numbers on this, that the majority of board seats go to people who are known to other board members as opposed to through search firms.
75% of board seats come out of the network. Having said that, I want to echo what Mary said. It is for a lot of smaller companies, there's no search firm involved. But when you get to the bigger companies, search firms are involved and they put names in the pool. So do people on the board. And search firms, and we've worked with a bunch who I think now really understand our women and our pitch and the lawyer side of things. But to be perfectly straightforward, they get paid when they place. And board searches are actually not their most profitable work. So for them to go out on a limb for anyone doesn't make sense to their business model. I'm not saying they don't, because I saw them. I was on the Nom and Gov committee at FINRA and I saw them in action and they were fabulous with us. But at the same time, if you come in because somebody on the board recommended you, you're going to get a different kind of attention. And then if they're using a search firm, you're going to be vetted by the search firm in whatever way the vetting happens.
That is all really helpful advice. And I see another question, which I think is a great one. Would love to hear everyone's thoughts on, which is for those of us looking for our first board seat, it can feel like we would be happy with any seat. How do we get specific without narrowing our board seat description to the point that it makes it difficult for someone to help you? And I think there's a little bit in that too about, vetting and not just jumping at the first one that comes along. So anyone want to tackle that question?
I'm happy to jump into that one too. Look, I think the single most important factor in deciding whether you want, well, there are two to me that are really important factors in deciding whether to join a board. The first is, how do you feel about the CEO? Is this somebody you think you trust, whose judgment is good, who's surrounded himself with talented people? And are you comfortable with the industry that the company is in? I mean, there are businesses out there that are perfectly legitimate businesses, but that some of us might not be particularly comfortable working in and promoting. So I think you have to really trust your gut about the CEO and be comfortable with the sector or the industry. I think it's really important to have looked carefully at who the other members of a board are to see if you're comfortable with those people, with their reputations and with what they do. And then, of course, there's a whole series of questions you need to ask if you're actually in the interview process about whether the board is just a receiver of information or does it debate and push back on what it's learning? How does management present to the board? Do you just see the CEO and the CFO, or do you see the broader management team and the next generation of potential managers? How long has the board been together? If it's a long-standing club of board members, could be very cliquish and very hard to break through. And that's something you need to think about. What has been their tenure? Is the board diverse? Do they value diversity? Are they actively seeking to diversify the board? Do they respect each other and work well together? I mean, there are so many things. Some of them are hard to know before you're in the interview process, but you shouldn't come through the interview process and out the other end without having had those types of questions answered to your satisfaction.
Yeah, and Mary, I completely agree with everything you've shared. And certainly those are some of the steps I've gone through when I'm determining whether I want to take a call about a particular potential board seat. But one way that I also get to know the company a little, and I'll share with the audience, that you might want to listen to earnings calls. You get to hear the CEO and sometimes management and certainly CFO present. It helps you understand the strat, the plans, the execution, and importantly, the performance. It also sometimes talks about what they're working on, and you may hear something that cues you to, I have that skill set. This is something I can do and I can help. And I use that today to look at various companies. So consider earnings calls.
That's a fabulous idea.
Great. And then I was just going to say the camaraderie piece is so key, Mary, in terms of knowing who the board is and whether you want to fit in and can fit in, and it's a board and fellow sister board members that you want to spend that much time with, because it's a lot of time investment as well.
This is all great advice. I want to turn to the leavening agent just quickly. Kathleen, you spoke so powerfully at the awards luncheon and used this very powerful metaphor about leavening agents for yourself and for others. And I looked up the definitions. I was like, I know what it means in terms of baking, but and one definition said an agent that stimulates or precipitates a reaction, development, or change. I love that. So if people just talk briefly about what have been powerful leavening agents for you. And I know what I love too, Kathleen, you talk about it as almost a continual process. Would love to hear that.
Yeah, I'll mix it with another question around best advice, and it's having that can-do attitude. And that's an ingredient that both family, friends, mentors, colleagues have certainly invested within me and my career growth, and understanding that it takes time. The other piece of the definition that you looked up, Brandy, is around the time it takes to rise, because oftentimes we want to leap right in and be that member. And you've heard a lot today from the other members of the panel about being, intellectually curious, taking your time, doing your homework, networking. All of these things are leavening agents if we took a step back and looked at them. In my case, and I'll just once more give a shout out to my amazing mentors, they continually gave me feedback that I had to be receptive to. Had I not, I would not have grown. And so I count that as a key to my learning and my development and my continual growth.
Great, thank you. So helpful. And that's a good segue for sort of the wrap up comments from Mary and Hillary too, about just what has been the most best or powerful advice you've ever received or given as you thought about your board journey.
That's actually a really hard question. I would say you have to put in the time. You've got to learn not just corporate governance, which is obviously critically important, and the general principles of corporate governance matter. You've got to actually learn the industry and the sector and how the company functions and what its operations look like, and to be a really effective board member. And the best colleagues I've had on boards are the people who have done that. They've taken the time. They visited manufacturing facilities as Kathleen did. They have talked to the regulators if it's a highly regulated industry. They have really reached out to understand the business in a very profound way. And I think that really is the key to success.
Great practical advice. Thank you. And Hillary.
I'll just add to that. It's something we say all the time. It's something I already said in this program that is hard for me and makes me nervous. And that is, you truly have to learn not to be afraid to ask and not to be hurt by what you hear in response. You have to be able to take it in. You have to be able to keep asking, and you have to be able to keep refining yourself. I mean, some people think of this as overused, but that's what having grit and a growth mindset is all about. And it's powerful in this space, just like it is in so many others.
Great. I think that's the perfect note to end on, because I see that we are at time. And I just want to thank our audience for listening and tuning in, and apologies if we didn't get to your question, tried to get to several of them. And also obviously a big thank you to our panelists, Kathleen, Hillary, and Mary, for sharing their wisdom and taking the time. You whetted our appetites at the luncheon, so I'm glad we got to have this more in-depth time with you. Just for the audience, we'll let you know to stay tuned for details for future programming coming up, and then also ask if you could take a few minutes at the end of this webinar. A survey will launch. We really would appreciate your feedback. It helps us refine our programming and offer programming that will be useful to you. So again, big thank you to the attendees, to Kelsey, and to our panelists for joining us today for this session. And congrats again to the honorees. You can see why all of them are honorees.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.